Hello everyone, my name is Trickster Fox, and yeah, it's been a while since I did a video like this. Earlier in May of this year, I did a 2-part video on 8 games for the Game Boy Advance that I felt needed more attention. They weren't necessarily hidden gems or anything like that, I guess some of them were, but the reason I brought them up was because I hardly see anyone talking about those games, even if they have gotten a fair bit of attention. I think it's time I did so again, but this time with 5 games for another system that I absolutely love, the original Sony PlayStation. Now granted, I didn't get a PlayStation until Christmas of 2001. By that time, the next-gen consoles like the PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, and original Xbox were already out, and I didn't get a GameCube until just a year after. And the version of the PlayStation 1 that I got wasn't the original gray block version either, it was the Slim Edition. The first few games I got for it were based on things I was into at the time, like this game based on the Blue's Clues TV show that aired on Nick Jr. back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Let's see, I would have been about 6 by the time I got that game, so I'd argue I was the right age for a game like that. But it wasn't until just a year later when I got some more PlayStation games, along with my first Nintendo GameCube. Games that I enjoyed a lot more and go back to from time to time, like Spider-Man by Neversoft, the same development team behind the ever-so-awesome Tony Hawk series, and the original Spyro the Dragon by Insomniac, the same company behind the creation of a futuristic sci-fi game series that you may know as Ratchet & Clank. The games you'll see on this list may not be hidden gems, but again, I don't see people talking about these games all that much, so keep in mind I'm just trying to put these games into the spotlight so that they get the recognition I feel they deserve. Without further ado, let's get right to it. This is my list of 5 great PlayStation games that deserve more attention. Before we begin, one thing I will do differently in this video is that for each game I'll have as part of a certain category. And since this list will have 5 games in it, that means I'm going to have 5 different categories in no particular order. The categories are Beat 'em Up, Action, RPG, Racing, and Horror. With these categories in mind, I had to look for PS1 games that fit with each category. If you don't think a game that I picked fits with the category I put it in, that's fine. If anything, it at least gives me an excuse to talk about it anyway. So, now that the rules are set, let's get started. The year is 1997, Los Angeles, California. Richter Harris, a very well-respected doctor, snaps one day and goes on a murder spree in the hospital he happens to work at. Now he's locked himself deep within the hospital with no intention of giving himself over to the police surrounding the area. So, hoping to draw him out, the authorities ask for the assistance of his daughter Laura to go in and see if she can reason with him, since it's very likely he'll listen to her. As Laura goes in, however, she's soon transported to a creepy castle made from Richter's mind and must save her deranged father in just 2 hours, before it's too late. That's essentially the story behind D. No, really, that's the name of the game, just the letter D. Released in 1995 for the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and even the ill-fated 3DO, D is unlike any game I've ever seen or played. If it hadn't been for Derek Alexander from the YouTube channel Stop Skeletons from Fighting, I would have never known about this game or the series that it was a part of. Apparently, there are 2 other games in this little trilogy that happen to star a woman named Laura. No, it's not the same Laura going from one game to the next, although the original version of the second game was going to star the son of Laura Harris. The other 2 games in question being Enemy Zero, which was released exclusively for the Sega Saturn, and D2 for the Sega Dreamcast. I'd argue this isn't really a horror game because there's no threat following Laura, but I guess the creepy setting and a lot of the things she comes across are enough to throw it into that category. If anything, I'd say that D is much more of a horror puzzle game played in a first-person perspective. Her movements are very limited, making the game feel a lot more like an interactive film. This little D trilogy was the brainchild of the late Kenji Eno, a fine programmer and storyteller for his time. And I think compared to other horror games, even at the time, D stands out as a very unique game all on its own. And to add to that, I've learned D had been re-released on Steam a little while back, so if you're familiar with this game, you have a chance to replay it, or if you want an interesting horror game to play, the Steam version only costs $6, which is a steal if you ask me. In conclusion, D is a game like no other and deserves more recognition now than it has ever gotten in the past.
Laura, this is your father. Laura, go back. You must not cross over to this side. This is another world born of my own mind. Laura, go back. Come further and your world will be closed off from you. Laura, I'm
If you grew up on the Sega Genesis, or the Mega Drive if you live across the pond, it's very likely at some point you've at least heard of a little game called Gunstar Heroes. It was a classic co-op run-and-gun, very eerily similar to the likes of the Contra series. This isn't all that surprising since the company that developed Gunstar Heroes, Treasure, was founded by former Konami employees. Now, what's my reason for bringing up this classic Sega gem? Because Gunstar Heroes was sort of an inspiration in terms of the style and design for this next entry, a criminally underrated run-and-gun called Rapid Reload, or Gunner's Heaven as it's known in Japan. In many ways, just by looking at this footage, you can tell that it has that same style of quality and gameplay that Gunstar Heroes had, and I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if this game somehow inspired Treasure when they made the completely unexpected GBA sequel to their epic run-and-gun, Gunstar Superheroes. In this game, you can play as either Treasure Hunter, Axel Sonics, or Ruka Hetfield, as they fight against a terrorist organization called the Pumpkinheads, as they too are looking for the legendary Valkyrie treasure. There are quite a few mechanics you can easily tell this game borrows from Gunstar Heroes, such as switching weapon types on the fly, 4 to be exact, being super agile, having over-the-top enemy designs and bosses, and let's not forget, an incredibly awesome soundtrack to boot. Although sadly, it is a shame that this game never got released in the US. Sure, it got released in Europe, which is why the dialogue is in English, but never here in the States. The reason, as stupid as it is, being that the higher-ups at Sony at the time just absolutely had no interest in having 2D games on their console. They did sort of change their minds as some time went along, but this game still never saw any kind of release in America at all. It did get re-released on PlayStation Network in 2007, and then again in 2010, but in Japan and the rest of Asia respectively. So, of course, if you do want to play this game in English, you'll just have to settle for emulation, which is how I recorded the footage you're seeing, like every other game on this list. Unless you're lucky enough to get a physical copy and play it on a PAL region PlayStation 1 or 2. Whatever the case, it's still such a shame that it would never see a proper release of any kind in the States, aside from emulation. But hey, as far as I'm concerned, it's better than nothing. I'll admit that while I do love myself a good beat-em-up like Final Fight, Streets of Rage, or River City Ransom, there are quite a lot that flew under the radar, and Gekido Urban Fighters on the PlayStation is no exception. A young woman named Angela has been kidnapped by a demon-worshipping psychopath named Kentaro. Up to the task is Travis, a private investigator hired by Angela's parents, along with some friends of his, Michelle, Tetsuo, and Ushi. As far as this game is concerned, the graphics are nothing to write home about. They're fairly standard for PS1 graphics, featuring music from artists like Fatboy Slim in Apartment 26, and the illustrations of the characters, like when you see them in the character select screen, having been drawn by comic book artist Joe Madureira, known for his work on the Uncanny X-Men and the Darksiders games? Really? Huh. You learn something new every day. There's even a fighting mode with which you can play up to 4 people via the multi-tap. So long story short, if you were to take Die Hard Arcade by Sega and the Rushing Beat trilogy on the Super Nintendo and put them together into a blender, the end result would essentially be Gekido on the PlayStation. Well, that's what I think anyway. If you feel like you've worn out your copy of Fighting Force and want to try another co-op beat-em-up, I think Gekido would be a good choice to go with for some 2-player fun, just beating up random gangsters.
Three, two, one, go!
Here's one game that's actually nostalgic for me. When it comes to racing games, I'm not that huge into them unless it's something like Mario Kart, F-Zero, Daytona USA, or even Ridge Racer. Thankfully, this is one of the only realistic racing games I'd ever sit down and play. Need for Speed High Stakes. I call it a realistic racing game simply because you get to race in cars that actually exist. Corvettes, Lamborghinis, Aston Martins, BMWs, and so on. I know there are other games in this series that some may consider better, and they probably are, but I have a soft spot for this one since it's actually a game I used to own for my PlayStation, and it's still fun to play now. In fact, I remember when my niece and nephew visited me a few years ago, and we'd spend the whole Saturday night just doing 2-player races in our favorite cars. It was pretty chaotic, but still pretty fun. It just goes to show how good this game really is. though it's pretty sad that it gets overshadowed by a lot of other racing games, even ones on the same console. But still, if you want a racing game where you get to race in real cars against your friends, I'd recommend checking this one out. Just drive around different countries in your favorite sports car, listening to pretty pumpin' late 90s beats, my favorite one being Fight by Junkie XL.
That's your best lap. You won the race.
Alright, I'll be honest. I am cheating a little bit with this one, but I still feel it's worth mentioning, so there you go. Alundra on the PlayStation, according to many, is essentially Sony's answer to The Legend of Zelda, but partially also takes inspiration from Landstalker on the Sega Genesis. In fact, it's right down to the point where Alundra looks almost exactly like Nigel from Landstalker. But the difference is that Alundra is an elf who can enter the dreams of others, having the title of Dreamwalker. Actually, wait. Why wasn't that used for the title of the game? If you ask me, I think that'd be much more fitting of a name. Oh well, in any case, Alundra, whether it's a blatant Zelda clone or not, is still a great action RPG adventure game. It's technically not a hidden gem, but it is lesser known than most RPGs that were on the PlayStation, so all the more reason to give it some attention. I honestly love the idea of going into people's dreams to help them overcome their nightmares by beating the ever-living crap out of monsters and gaining new items and weapons as you keep going. Even though this isn't technically an RPG of any kind, I would have put Dragon Valor in the place of Alundra, but as overshadowed as Dragon Valor is, Alundra deserves just a little more respect because it's still a game worth playing, as is every game on this list. Well, that's another list down. It took me quite some time just from recording all the footage alone, but in the end, I'm glad I did this list, and got to show off some games you guys probably never even heard of before. Some of which were nostalgic even to me, or games I discovered later in my life through emulation. Hey, that's better than nothing, I feel. Again, not hidden gems, but still don't get that much attention. Thank you so much for checking this video out. I'd been thinking on what kind of games to use for a list like the one on the GBA games, so I thought I'd follow it up with PlayStation games. I mean, the PlayStation was an amazing console that handled so many different genres, and it lasted for 11 years. 11 years! From 1995 all the way to 2006. For an old console, that's pretty impressive that it stuck around as long as it did, and a ton of great games that you could play on it? I guess Sony did their job, and did it very well. For the most part, but hey, you can only do so much, right? Anyways, that's the end of the video, and this is Trickster Fox saying goodbye for now, have a good day, and remember to keep your gaming spirit alive. With that said, I will see you guys later. Take care.